In this video, we strive to remain spoiler-free, discussing only story and plot elements from the books relevant to what has occurred already on the show. When necessary, a spoiler warning with a countdown will be given.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca.
I'm Max.
I'm the Geeky Hippie. Welcome back to WoT the Adaptation. We're the YouTube show where we review adaptations from one form to another. Today we're looking at The Expanse, the series of books of Leviathan Wakes being adapted into The Expanse on Sci-Fi Channel. Max, what can you tell us about the episode?
Well, this is episode 5, Back to the Butcher. It was written by Dan Nowak, directed by Rob Lieberman, and first aired January 5th, 2016. Pretty much in this episode, the crew of the Canterbury had accepted Fred Johnson's proposal to join him at Tycho Station. And with his assistance, they were able to modify the ship's transponder, renaming it the Rocinante.
Finally.
Yep. And a flashback shows how Johnson became the butcher of Anderson Station. And finally, on Miller's side, back on Ceres, he finds evidence linking Julie Mao to the OPA, and while leaving her apartment with a data chip, he is abducted.
Dun dun dun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good synopsis. What did you guys think of this episode?
I thought really strong, interestingly, on the Miller side, considering there was like a lot of stuff changed around and added there. There was definitely less for the Rocinante crew, I'd say. But I think they sort of were like, it was a trade-off that we got all the Anderson Station stuff basically in place of that.
For me, it wasn't like the strongest episode.
No?
It was more on the boring side, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
At this point in time, I don't really care about Fred Johnson's story as much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's important, but it's like I don't really care about his character that much at this point in the story.
Right.
And Miller's story is very similar now to the books, where I'm like, I don't really care about your story right now, dude. I want to see the Rocinante crew.
Yeah. So it makes sense that this episode wouldn't be as good for you because it was pretty light on the Rossi crew.
I'm completely the opposite. I loved the Miller stuff. Miller's probably the character I can identify the most with, in part because he's got that line, I turn next June. I turn next July, a year from now. So I'll be
feeling it
the end of the month, and I feel that, and it just I kind of identified with him, especially when I was listening to this segment or approximate segment of the book.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it's the best, but it's one of my. It's a good episode.
It had some good cliffhangers.
Yeah.
All right. So should we dive into it? Yeah. I mean, this. In terms of just changes from the source material, I think, it's like in some ways they just went about things in a little bit of a different way. Like, even just like the battle of Anderson, or that's not battle, but the attack on Anderson Station, that's sort of in the books. It's just like we don't really see it play out, but they did include that. So that was a pretty big change, but not like a departure from the source material. It's just, what are we being shown?
Well, it is a departure because the way it all plays out is very different than what we see on the show. On the books, it's a 3-day fight inside the station before the Marines take it. This was just, they breached the hull and spaced everybody. Women, children, everybody. And they only show these guys sitting around with their kids. And in the books, we're told that there's a bunch of them weren't fighting, we're actually armed and out there fighting. The whole way it played out, even the whole motivation for why they took the station, here it was because, there was bad air. And in the book, it was the price of air went up. And so there was a scarcity of it. And so they just couldn't get any air. So there's a lot of changes, but thematically they kept it mostly the same, but it makes Fred Johnson look worse.
One thing I would have liked
Yeah.
had they done in this episode is really like show the corporate interest in the
Yeah.
station, because it would
That
give
would
you
be
a
good.
different side to what's going on his ship.
I'm not sure it would have made them look any better, but it would have been interesting. Yeah. I mean,
Because this made the resistors look incredibly 100%, sympathetic.
oh yeah, no, you're right. That's the main difference.
But
How are you
you
going to
know,
justify what
how
Fred
do you,
Johnson
how do
did
you
there?
accidentally shove someone out an airlock? You know,
Hmm.
'cause that was the one thing in the book they did that. I think that's what they said they did when they killed, the administrator or whatever, and the guy said that was an accident.
Yeah, I'm sure it wasn't.
But
Because a thought for me is like in the beginning of the books, the crew has the corporate interest for what they're supposed to do,
Mhm.
and now they're going back and forth about what should we do, and the corporation's like saying do
True,
this,
yeah.
and we kind of missed that in the TV show. They could have kind of
Mm.
brought that back in here had they really wanted
Yeah.
to.
Well,
But instead, we kind of get the corporate side in like season 2 or 3.
yeah, and certainly that's got to be a factor.
Mhm.
And I mean, why else are you like giving these people so little air? You're just trying to save money, right? There's really no other reason to do that.
I
So
really got like union vibes out of this. Like, they're trying to unionize, and they're like, no,
oh yeah,
space.
definitely.
yeah,
And I'm fully in favor of them unionizing.
so I think in a way, as you're we're getting into the details here, I have to say, like, I don't know how much time you want to spend on this, so maybe they kind of have to make it a little bit less nuanced if you don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But it's probably not as great, to have it be a completely one-sided story.
Right.
Basically what happened there was wrong, regardless. Like, all these people lost their lives. That shouldn't have happened.
Right.
But you kind of have it's very black and white.
Yeah. It's like starkly black and white.
Like, you can't really justify in any way what Fred Johnson did.
No. And then all of a sudden he's a big shot in the OPA running Tycho Station.
Yeah.
Okay, we get a little bit of background in the books. That still doesn't make it clear to me how he ended up running Tycho Station. I don't know if the rest of the books ever cover that, but that's something I want to understand, how he went from stopping the one fight to where he is now. But he is one of my favorite characters on the show.
I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, that could be a whole thing that you could get more stories about, basically Fred Johnson and his life in between.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't have that here.
So like, I did watch the episode, and it feels like I like walked out for 5 minutes and came back in and missed Fred Johnson on the ship
Yeah.
at the Anderson station.
Yeah.
I don't know if they cut a scene or what, but it just feels like it's missing
Right.
something there.
All you get
It's
is that
abrupt.
one shot of him,
Yeah.
like in a spacesuit,
Mhm.
like basically watching.
It is
I guess,
voice-
like the debris or whatever.
Yeah, his voice over the comms the first time.
Yeah,
and
you get
second
his
time.
voice, and then but basically that you get that shot of him where someone's like telling him, like, basically, good job.
Yeah.
I would have loved just to have been on the bridge with him for this
Mhm.
episode.
Yeah.
And-
That I think that probably would have made it better, if you could have incorporated him into those scenes, and maybe then you could have made it a little less one-sided. I don't
Mhm.
know how, but
Yeah. Because
I just like to get like his being berated by like his people about what to do, and he's like no or whatever else that leads him into becoming part of Tycho Station and the
Yeah.
OPA.
I'm just kind of biased, in favor of Fred Johnson,
mhm.
and that's in part because Chad Coleman, like I discussed before, I just really like Chad Coleman as an actor, and now that I've read the first book a couple of times, and The Butcher of Anderson Station, I'm like, yeah, that's like almost the perfect casting. I can't think of anybody else that would have fit as well as Fred Johnson.
No, I definitely agree. It's perfect casting. It's more just like, in this particular episode, do these scenes work as well for their purpose as they should? I think
I
it's
think they
kind
work
of a mixed
too well.
bag. Yeah,
I think they work too well.
they work a little too well.
They were
Yeah.
supposed to make you distrust.
Yes.
And that's an important word for later. They're supposed to make you distrust Fred Johnson. Because then
Naomi does, yeah.
They immediately cut to him talking on with the one message at one point, you know.
Mhm.
And it's just like,
Right. You're right. It's there, and it certainly serves that purpose. But yeah, it probably could have been a little bit more nuanced, and it might have even been a little bit more effective. Like, I mean, of course, you feel for like this father and his daughter and all these people, but maybe it just didn't kind of come across as real because it's a little too black.
And I understand it was a time and money saving decision.
I'm sure.
I don't think it played as well as it should have, or it played too well, like I suggested, you know.
Yeah.
They should have pulled back a little on that.
I agree.
Was there anything else that you liked? Any other changes you liked?
We just dove right into like, hey, a change that none of us actually are like, hey, that was the greatest change, you know?
Well,
right.
But oh well.
I was going to say one other thing about the Fred Johnson thing.
Yeah.
Is it kind of makes me wonder from a TV show perspective, because we didn't really get his side in the ship.
Mm-hmm.
Did he have orders to blow this up, or did he make like a political move to make it sound like the UN or whatever is the bad guy, and he was, I did an illegal order, I didn't want to do it, but I had to do it, so I defected.
No. Yeah. He was considered in the books. He's considered a hero afterwards, you know, but he resigned and disappeared. You know,
it's like if he had that illegal order, he said, I don't want to do it, but we did it anyways, and then defects to the OPA, like that could be a way of getting their support. But was it a political move on his side to do this on purpose, to defect to gain power?
I mean, my impression is that he defects after the fact. The decision to defect is after, because he feels so terrible. And he's just basically like, all right, I'm going to just spend the rest of my life trying in some way to make up for that action.
But, in the show, if we're not supposed to trust him.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's not at all, none of that is in the show at this point. So we're not supposed to necessarily trust him. And so
that's where my detrusting brain goes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was all politics.
Right.
Plot.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Any other changes you liked, Rebecca?
Yeah. So we'll talk about changes that I liked, because that one I felt like was kind of a mixed bag. Like I get why they included it, and there's some good things about it, but mixed. So yeah, it's interesting. Like there's a lot of changes in the Miller side of things. And I ended up liking a lot of his scenes. So overall, I'm going to say I did like the things they changed. It's just sort of interesting, because I feel like at this point in the book, if we're just talking about like a certain, section of the book, he's in a different place. Like this, like, a lot of this stuff is just added and but what I like, I guess, about the Miller changes is I feel like in a lot of the scenes, there's these little hints about something that, there's a couple hints without getting too far ahead of like what's coming. People being surprised that Miller is not drinking. And then also there's the moment where Muss tells him, like, take this up the chain, and he's like, okay, you don't think I can do it, I'll just try my pathetic best. So I think there's all that in there that's sort of, it becomes, I think, much more like explicit in the book at this relative stage in the book. It's becoming explicit, like more of what's going on with Miller, but we're not quite there yet, and so it's more just like hinting at some things going on with him. So I like that. And then also, well, on the Rocinante side, I would say there's very little drama that happens in this section of the book for them. Like,
who stinks worse? Who stinks more?
We finally got to the point where they're sitting around doing nothing for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it makes sense to me that they added this disagreement over whether they go to Fred Johnson or not. You know,
Right.
that was not in the book. Like in the book, they're just like, yeah, want to go to Fred? Yep. Okay. what else are we gonna do? We're all gonna go to see Fred. So, but I guess it didn't just add that conflict for them. I will also say I think they're hinting at a bit of Naomi's backstory, which hasn't come into play yet,
Right.
by making her the one who doesn't want to go to him. And she doesn't really explain it, but she makes it clear to Amos, at least, like it's because of Fred Johnson specifically, and she's known men like him. And that's kind of the most we get out of it. But
Or like what she thinks he is.
right, that's true, because she doesn't actually know him. I don't think
Right.
she's ever met him. It's just like she has an impression of him, and she's relating him to men she does know. So I do think that worked with her backstory. So overall, I think those basic changes I liked, and there were some other things I didn't like, but we'll save that.
I also like all the Miller stuff. And having Miller learn from Anderson Dawes that Julie was on the scopuli, I think condenses down that whole sequence of events that he has to go through to figure that out on his own. And I like Miller finding that it allows Dawes to be more condensed, I guess you could say. All the scenes with Anderson Dawes, because that's it shrinks it all down.
Well, one thing is pretty different with Dawes, right? Because it doesn't in the book, like, Dawes just like tell him like to stop looking into Julie, and then in the show he's just like wants the information. So he's kind of like, if you find anything out, tell me. He doesn't tell him to stop, so that's pretty different.
I didn't at first like that they dropped the sensei at the jiu-jitsu dojo, the jiu-jitsu place, because I liked that scene. And there was, I'm trying to find it, there's a great line, a bit of dialogue in there about, I think she's in trouble, and the master's like, why do you care? And Miller's like, I don't have an answer for that. And I just like, Holden's starting to realize that he's obsessing on Julie. And he's starting to consciously be aware of his behavior at this point.
I think that's in this episode. All the indications that Miller is starting to obsess about Julie. I think that's there in different ways. I think.
Yeah, and I think it's been there. I think it's been there in the past.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's not like that. I don't think that's unclear in the show that he is developing an obsession with her. I think that's coming across.
But at least we get a hint that she was doing martial arts, because she took that guy down in the security footage. And when Miller goes and talks to him, you're seeing Donald Sutherland's other son, Kiefer Sutherland's half-brother, Rafen Sutherland. Okay. I was like, who's that? I just happened to move the cursor and it popped up, Rafen Sutherland. What? Who? So I looked it up. It's like, I didn't know. I never heard of him before. So I thought I'd bring everybody's attention. Not going to shout him out as a great actor, because he was just okay in his scene.
Yeah, it's fine.
He did what he needed to do.
Well, speaking of Miller, I felt like I got kind of hints about him not being as good of a detective as he thinks he is in this episode.
I think that is in there as well. Yeah.
I want to say it's between his interaction and the lady that said you need to go higher up.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's kind of where I got those vibes of.
Well, they flat out had that conversation in the book, with Muff
later.
Later. And
yes, and it's a shock to him. But the one thing that was a little interesting that might be a little different there is, like, again, when in that same scene where she's like, go higher up, and he's like, you don't think I can do it. But like, then he's like, when he says the line about I'll just do my pathetic best, it's like, does he think that that's true? Or does he not at that point? So it's a little unclear.
Both.
Maybe
probably
both.
goes both.
Yeah.
The depending
Yeah,
on
but
how he feels inside at any given moment.
yeah. But I think it's fair to say that, yeah, there's definitely hinting at like he doesn't necessarily have an accurate, picture of himself. I mean, even like there's that little line where someone says, "Oh, Miller didn't show up today." And no one seems all that surprised.
Right.
Like no one's like, "Oh, really, Miller?" I mean,
It,
Musk seems a little bit surprised, maybe, that he's not doing anything about Havelock. When she shows up in that scene and she's like,
she was
"Fight
surprised he
me."
wasn't drinking.
But right, again, she was surprised he wasn't drinking. Then he was drinking coffee, and Anderson Dawes was surprised he wasn't drinking when they were at the bar. So
Yeah.
yep.
Max, anything for you? Any favorite like changes you liked?
Nothing has already been mentioned really.
Okay.
Because like one of the
Um,
only change or scenes I mentioned hasn't been changed, so I'll wait till later.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Cool.
Oh, I was gonna
Um,
say, I've got a hunch. I don't know this is true or if it's anywhere out there in the material, but I've got a hunch that Miller used to be a good detective,
yeah.
and then him and Candace got divorced.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's when he started declining. Was after the
Right.
divorce.
Yeah, I think that is the way it is suggested in the books. Not that he's never been good, just
Yeah.
that he used to be good and doesn't realize that he's been on the decline for a while.
Yeah.
I'd mentioned I think part of it is he just needs a good mystery. I think he's the
Oh.
kind of guy that gets obsessed over a mystery
Yeah.
and hyper focuses on it,
Mhm.
and that's where he becomes a good cop. When he
Yeah.
doesn't hyper focus on something, he just kind of
Drifts and
Mhm.
does, nonsense and yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. And that's maybe why this whole thing with Julie is sort of waking him up a little bit, maybe not in the, the most effective, positive way, but he's maybe remembering a little bit of who he used to be or something.
Honestly, I think this might be one of the longest running detective tropes out there.
Yeah.
Of they're always drunks or drifting until they get that case that obsesses
one
them,
case there. Yeah.
and then they're back to drifting again.
The gumshoe kind of detective. I was going to say because I can think of a couple of shows that did an entire mystery the entire season. Like Veronica Mars.
Mhm.
If you've never watched Veronica Mars, seriously, watch Veronica Mars.
Yeah, I probably really should. I haven't seen it, but I'm sure I'd like. What? Well, the other thing I was going to say about that was like it's it suggests a lot of like film noir, um, you know, tropes
Yeah.
with the Miller character, and even the Julie character in a way. I mean, she's not really a femme fatale because she's not actually around, but like it's sort of
No, she's a
makes me
Dulcinea.
yeah. It's just but she's it's a kind of different version of that.
I do want to say I hate his haircut,
Do you?
Oh, see, I
particularly
like
in this
it.
episode.
I like
Oh,
it. I think
I
it's
like
funny.
it.
I think it's
I like
funny.
it too.
I like the hat. I hate the haircut.
That's
to
all
me,
right.
to me, I like the haircut because the hat makes everyone think that he's an earther or that he's like an earther's pet or whatever, and then the haircut is like Belter. So
Totally Belter.
yeah. So I think that's the reason for it there. He's like that dichotomy of, is he an earth? Well, he's not an earther, but like, is he a Belter or is he like assimilating with this earth owned company that he's worked for forever?
Yeah.
All right. So we talk any more about changes that we didn't like? We kind of covered that somewhat already.
I didn't like the hostility Miller showed towards both Havelock and Gia when he stopped in Havelock's cell.
Yeah.
Or hospital. I don't like them parting ways because that's the last time Havelock. That's the last episode Jay Hernandez was in. I looked it up on IMDb.
I didn't remember that.
That is his last episode. And
I don't like it
now,
either.
if you want more Jay Hernandez, go watch Magnum PI. He plays Thomas Magnum.
Mm.
I didn't realize that until I was hit his IMDb page and Thomas met them right there at the top. I'm like, okay. My parents love that show.
Yeah, I guess I don't love that either because, in the book that was sort of like a connection that he maintained, and
Yeah, because
I kind of liked that they're so different, but that they kind of connected in a way that they kind of almost shouldn't have, given like where they are and their
yeah,
backgrounds and everything. They shouldn't have really connected, but they did, and a little. And I kind of
enough
like that.
that when Havelock was somewhere else, he was willing to give information that helped lead,
Hmm.
Miller to censored.
Yes.
Gonna
Right. No,
censor. Um,
he
but
was part of him finding some clues that he needed to
yeah,
have. So yeah.
and so I know that he gets all that information a different way, but right
Yeah.
offhand, I don't remember exactly how because it's later on.
I don't remember either. The only thing I can think in doing this is that it's like another indicator that like Miller's not okay, basically, because there wasn't really any reason for him to act like that
Yeah,
towards Havelock. Like it just
it was
there.
just it was the first time I saw him being a real asshole.
Yeah, he was being a jerk for like no reason and like pushing someone away, and
But
so it's an indicator that he's not okay. But
yeah,
yeah, I don't love it either.
he has been declining not just as a detective, but did I close it? No, there we go, accidentally. But also as mental health. His mental health is declining seriously,
Yeah.
and in theory, we'll see it even more so later.
Hmm.
But I still have my theory that that's not what it seems. That it's more than it seems. But what else didn't like? Yeah,
um yeah.
I didn't like. Yeah, that's the big thing I didn't like was
Okay.
that.
Yeah, I have to agree. Max, do you have some others that you want to mention?
Nope.
Okay. I think the only other thing I particularly wanted to mention was sort of the last scene of the Rocinante crew in this episode. So this is like right before the scenes where Miller gets attacked at the very end. You kind of have like little individual scenes where they're each in their own space. Like Alex is in the pilot seat and
Amos is sitting on his bunk drinking.
and Holden is glorying in the coffee, and Naomi's just like, like kind of curled up in her bunk looking pretty unhappy. So I don't love that little scene. Or those little scenes, so it's a very
Really?
big difference. Yeah. I'm just not sure how I feel about them. Like in the book, basically instead you have these scenes at this point where that are sort of like homey and family like, like the four of them are together in the galley and they're sharing a meal together that they've made, and there's just a very big difference between, they're starting to form these like bonds of like family and trust in the book at this point, which is definitely not happening that we can see yet in the show. And I'm not opposed to there being more conflict or, more of a road for them to go through to form some of those bonds. But I also think like, in terms of like getting people invested in this group that have so much like conflict from the outside, I would like there to be a little bit more of those connections forming. Right now in the crew, the only real connection is between Amos and Naomi, which was pre-existing to the
Right.
four of them being a foursome. And I was just like, with everything they've been through, um, for them to really be actively kind of like annoyed with or distrusting each other or in such different places, just a little too much. And like it's just a sort of like a little bizarre contrast of like Naomi looks so unhappy and we don't really understand why, because all it is just hinting at this point like why she's acting that way. everybody else is like at least fairly content. Like Amos being in his own bunk on a ship drinking, he's fine. Alex has got a great ship that he's excited about flying, and Holden is like this happy over coffee.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it's
Coffee in
just
space is rare. Didn't you pick that up reading the books? It's
I get
really rare.
I get it. I totally get it. It's just and then Naomi is like a sort of like ball of misery, and we don't really know why. And it's just, I don't know, because I think maybe we don't really like get into that for a while.
Huh.
It's just,
I think
I don't know.
part of Naomi's problem is it's probably finally really hitting her that she just lost 51 friends.
Yeah, maybe it is just hitting her now. I mean, again,
Yeah.
people
And
all have
also,
good reasons to be miserable.
she
I'm not
doesn't have
saying
anything
she
to.
doesn't.
She doesn't have anything to do on that ship. Nothing to fix, she said.
Yeah, she wasn't happy about that. That's true.
I mean, that kind of is the nightmare for some engineers on ships, I would guess, not having anything to do. Depends on how much of a workaholic they are.
Yeah. Well, no, and they all clearly, have things in their personal lives that they want to
Yeah.
forget about.
I like that quick little vignette,
Yeah.
little
I
sequence.
think I just, want at this point to see there can be conflict between them. I just kind of want to
Right.
see a little bit more of those bonds forming, and like basically didn't get that in this episode. Like we could have
Yeah.
had some of that and we didn't really get it. So and then the
A
ending
little.
shows the opposite, that they're each in their own space, very disconnected. So
There was a little bit of a personality shifting and bonding type thing going on, because just an episode or two ago, Amos was choking the hell out of Alex.
yeah.
And then now he's hoping, he was hoping it, or that was last week's episode. Never mind. I was thinking the scene when Amos carried him out, when Alex was unconscious.
Yeah.
Amos suited him up and then carried him out. And
Yeah.
that's taking care. You were just choking the guy the day before, but 2 hours earlier.
Yeah, I mean, and I think in last week's episode there was more like of them working together to try and like get out of this. And like in this episode, I just feel like, it was emphasizing like that their separateness, their
I think they each needed to be alone for a little while.
I'd mentioned a couple things here. Is that Naomi and Miller's story are parallel in the sense that unless they have something to do, they have to think about themselves and how do they
don't want to do that.
Miller drinks. What does Naomi do?
Works.
Thinkers.
Yeah. She fixes things.
If you remember earlier in this season, when they had some downtime, when things were safe, that's when they started bickering more. Because when you were in a survival situation, you can't afford to bicker. You just got to get that stuff done.
Yeah.
And when you finally have some comfort, that's when you can start worrying about things that don't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, they're definitely playing up the conflicts between the crew at this point. And again, that's fine. I would just love to see some of what's bonding them together as well. Like just
they're doing
more of that in the mix.
They did that with, like I found out, they did that with Miller and Havelock, increased the conflict between the two of them. And then left Havelock behind. It's like,
remember what my
understanding, because it does nothing for the story.
Remember my first complaint on the series is there was too much drama between the characters.
Yeah.
And like now you're seeing that come to fruition of like there's all this drama that's just like, why?
Because there's hardly any interpersonal conflict in the books, I've noticed.
There's
at least with the Rossi crew.
Well, there is some, but it's somewhat of like a different nature.
I've read the first book and like a third of book 2, plus all the short stories and novellas that take place up to that point.
I think just going off of like what I like, just to pick one example, like what I can see of like in the show so far, like I would say that Naomi probably thinks that Holden is an idiot and just doesn't like him much at all. And that's not true in the books. Right. I mean, I think her feelings are more complex towards him at this point. There's definitely, maybe shades of some of that, but like it's not as strong or as simple as that. So
see, I just have to say, I feel that the added drama, interpersonal drama, is just entirely unnecessary.
Yeah.
I don't feel that it adds any more pleasure, enjoyment, fun, Schadenfreude,
Yeah, I mean,
nuance. It doesn't add anything except just pure drama for
I mean,
drama's sake.
it
And
can sometimes add things, but yeah, in this case, I'm not
yeah,
sure it is adding anything. And
you
like I
don't
Not
said,
in this episode.
you don't
I
need that
agree
much
with
episode. Or,
I agree, I do agree with them, like Naomi disagreeing about going to Fred Johnson. Like I think that I'm fine with that. Like
that's
she
that.
disagrees with it. Amos has to kind of like talk to her a little bit. I did like that scene where he's like, I usually back you because you are smart, you make sense, and like you're not really making sense here. So like, and then she changes her mind. So I'm good with that. But some of the rest of it, just yeah.
Yeah, it's too much.
Okay, so let's move on and talk about scenes we liked and didn't like. So, ones we liked first, most memorable, most loved scenes in the episode. Who wants to start us off?
Can you guess mine?
Well, definitely something with the Rossi crew.
Definitely.
I really like the coffee scene.
Yes.
Anyone that's ever had to like stay in a hospital for like a week and deal with crappy hospital coffee for a prolonged period of time, and you go out and you finally get a good cup of coffee.
Especially when they're giving you decaf.
It's just the best thing ever.
Okay. So you related to Holden in that moment.
Definitely.
When I felt like, yeah, Holden was really, really feeling good right there.
I really enjoyed it, but I didn't list it as my favorite. But yeah, I can totally identify with Holden finding the coffee maker and all the store coffee, especially in space, because most people who are drinking coffee, it's some yeast based, some fungus based.
That's all anybody eats is
The-
yeast.
The other scene I actually liked was when they named the ship.
I like that too. Yeah.
I've referenced D&D occasionally, and like that moment literally just like that's when the party gets together and like we need a name, and you get two really stupid names and finally get a good name.
Right. Alex's job was to give the stupid name, and then Holden comes up with a name that sticks, and because Amos agreed with him, so he had his own.
Speaking of groups that get together and give themselves a name, the book I'm reading right now, it's Michael J. Sullivan's Ryeria Chronicles. It's about a fighter and a thief who pair up and call themselves Ryeria, which is Elven for two in that world. And nobody else knows what Ryeria means. It's just but they take high stakes, high priced jobs. They don't just go and break into places on their own. They take jobs, commissions to do stuff. Really fun series. But I just had to give a plug for a series of books I'm liking, especially since a pair of guys who had a group name. So,
I mean, the book one of Lord of the Rings, they become the Fellowship.
Yeah.
Yes. Although
Well,
Elrond
2 hours in
decrees that, doesn't he?
Yeah, Elrond does that.
Yeah.
A little silly, I think, but when I was a kid, I really dug it. But as I got older, I'm like, it's kind of corny.
Well, it is corny, but
yeah, I'm like, I still love it. It's Lord of the Rings. We'll talk about that eventually here. Scenes I like.
Yeah, go for it.
I really liked the scene on the train with Miller, with his mind starting to play tricks on him, or was it playing tricks on him? Was he really hearing what? And it was a lot better if you watch it with captions, so you can catch everything that everybody's saying. Because I had a hard time catching it. People off camera saying stuff. Or him hearing things we don't know. But I think it's quite likely he's starting to see things. The other scene that I really liked was the scene with Miller and Dawes at the ramen bar.
That one. That was
in
a
the
good
ramen bar. The blue place. That scene was great. I mean,
yeah.
My favorite character on the show right now, mixed with my favorite actor on the show right now, that's not named Shora.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree about the scene with Anderson Dawes. Actually, I knew when I was watching that scene, I'm like, Glenn is gonna love this scene, and I loved it too. I think Dawes is a better character in the show.
Yes.
He just is. And then it's like when he's talking about like, you know, Earthers have a home, you know, Belters need a home, basically. I'm like, yeah, he's right. He's right.
You can't argue with him most of the time.
So that was a good scene. I liked it for a lot of reasons. So yeah, that one's on my list too. I mean, basically all my favorite scenes in this episode were pretty much Miller scenes. Like, I mean, I enjoyed some of the Rossi crew scenes, but I just feel like Miller had a lot of really strong scenes. So another one that I feel like we haven't really mentioned much, so I'll throw it out there, is the scene with him and the guy that what's the word I'm searching for? Like rent. He didn't really rent it, but whatever. Like
he was chartered by Julie.
Chartered. Yeah.
That's Don Sutherland's son.
Oh, okay.
Neville Bosch or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is in the show. So anyway, the guy who chartered his ship to Julie, I enjoyed that scene. I think again, there's another scene where we're really kind of seeing how, you know, Miller's interest in Julie is like, you know, it's getting to that level. And I think it's somewhat reflected in this other character who maybe kind of had a thing for Julie too. Like you kind of get the sense that maybe there's something about Julie, like, you know, that draws people in.
Like I said earlier, she's Dulcinea.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought that was a good scene and something that, you know, just was sort of unexpected. So
I never got the connection between Ben Stiller and There's Something About Mary with Julie.
Comes across a little different, but you know, what can I say? There's something about Julie.
Did you have to phrase it that way?
I did.
You talking about that movie? Okay.
Yep. I'm sorry, I had to. Yep.
Just making sure. I'm not gonna bleep it or nothing. You didn't swear, but that was well placed in there.
Glenn just doesn't like comedies.
No, I do like comedies. I just don't watch a lot of comedies on my own. You know, I won't decide, okay, I want to put on a comedy.
Okay. Glenn doesn't like to laugh.
No, I do like
News
to
at
laugh.
11.
I do watch Kevin Smith and Mark Bernard, and every week they're Fat Man Beyond, and they make me laugh. Literally laugh out loud. I'm sitting here, and you know, I'll be laughing. Everybody else in the house can hear me laughing. It's like, so where are we at? Boss Mary?
Okay, scenes we didn't like. So let's talk about any scenes that we didn't care for. I feel like I kind of maybe I already talked about mine. You guys go.
I understand its purpose in the episode. I like its purpose in the episode. I would put it in the episode. I just did not like how it was executed. And that's all the flashbacks to Anderson Station.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't like it because of the changes they made. And the changes they made just don't make any sense. And I'm trying to give them benefit of the doubt on these changes, but I still can't come up with a reason why these changes were made.
I mean, I can come up with a reason. I mean, I don't necessarily think that it played out as well.
A good reason.
Well, I mean, the reason being that they needed to really make it clear that we should be doubtful about trusting Fred Johnson, because otherwise, like, I mean, what other choice do they have? You know, so I mean, I don't necessarily, I agree with you, and I don't think it was necessarily executed as well as it should have been. And you know, again, I think it should be in the episode. I don't love the execution,
right?
But I can see good reasons for what they did. I just don't love it.
Right. I mean, I did not like the execution at all. You know, I think they played their hand too hard, too much. You know, they overplayed what they had, and it just, you know, they were they should have been shooting for a 7, and they went for a 15.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, I hear you.
So That's
Max,
what I like, you know.
Yeah. What do you think, Max?
For me, both you basically covered the two of them. You got the Anderson Station thing where I pointed out were ways I thought they could have made it much better than they did,
Yeah.
and they just kind of avoided it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other ones you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the drama and the Rocinante crew.
Basically the Rossi crew. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So for me, I think that you know, again, I don't hate it, but like that montage of the four of them and they're separate, you know, kind of indicative of that drama that was there. I don't. That was probably my least favorite.
But mind you, I love the coffee scene. I like the whiskey scene, but
Right.
I can understand like where you dislike that of them going off separate ways and just the general drama.
And then just there's like the contrast too of like, again, I understand Holden with the coffee, but like when you compare Holden with the coffee to like Naomi and like what, you know, where she seems to be at, it's like there's just this huge contrast. They're all in their separate places. We're not really getting a sense of like, you know, them coming together, which I think I wanted that to balance the conflict. So yeah. Okay. So we kind of basically, we covered that.
Yeah.
We're getting ahead of ourselves on things we didn't like really. Okay. So we can move on and talk about actors. Who do we want to shout out this week? Anybody we need to call out this week?
The coffee cup.
Yes. The coffee cup.
Definitely.
And the coffee. No, I agree with Glenn, who was pointing to Thomas Jane, that this was absolutely a fantastic Thomas Jane episode. He was my
and Jared Harris, of course.
And Jared Harris, yeah, he in that scene, I agree.
How can you forget Eva Slora?
She wasn't there.
Oh, right, but you know,
She was totally there.
But she's always
her influence was there.
Yes.
But she was not present.
But also, I think we can now fully explain why this was none of our favorite episode, because we did not have
Sorella.
Yeah. So
and I proposed. Max suggested that we put her in like an always best actors grouping. I suggest that we just put Jared Harris in there too when he appears.
I mean, sure.
Yeah. Okay. So we don't need to really mention them anymore. Everybody knows Jared Harris and Show Agnes Lou when they're in our best
Sometimes
actors.
we're going to talk about them anyway, but yes, they're always good. So we just, you know, they're at the best. All right. Anybody else that we need to mention? No. This is just such a strong Thomas Jane episode that it's really hard to talk about anybody else. He was so good.
So good.
Yeah, he was really, really good. Okay. So let's talk about themes. I'm kind of interested to talk about themes for this episode. Max, do you want to go first, or I can dive in? It's up to you.
Well, I mean, the obvious one again is resource scarcity in this episode.
Okay.
With the lack of oxygen on that station, which led to the conflict, was a big one. And that was pretty much the only example I can think off the top of my head for that as a theme. You have possibly a theme, if you want to call it that, of the detective, angle.
You were saying resource scarcity. He said he needs more puzzle pieces, more clues. So he's scarce on that resource. Yes. So there's another resource scarcity.
Holden had been scarce on coffee, but now he is no longer scarce on coffee.
True. Amos with his whiskey.
Yep. Whatever that is. Yeast-based alcohol, whatever.
Whiskey, bourbon.
I don't know. Hopefully it's the good stuff, whatever it is.
I don't drink hardly ever, so.
Yeah.
It's one of the brown hard liquors.
Yeah, whatever.
I'm more into Sheds. I'm more into what Shed had.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, poor Shed.
Shed's head.
Too soon. All right.
Looks like Ned's head. I saw a poem about Ned's head after Ned Stark got killed on Game of Thrones, and it was just funny. It was called Ned's head, and I'll never get that out of my head.
Yeah. There you go. Okay. So for me, I think the theme that I wanted to focus on for this episode was last ditch efforts. So I think if we look at the Rossi crew,
the idea here is that they're kind of out of options, and Fred Johnson is the only lifeline they have. So again, the emphasis on, oh, he's not someone to trust, that he then becomes their sort of last ditch effort to find any kind of port in the storm, to go to. And for even, looking at the Anderson Station scenes, that clearly they were making a ditch effort to try and save themselves at that point, not even fight for what they had wanted, but just they're out of options, and they're attempting to survive, and doesn't work out so well. And then for Miller, it's much more complex, but I see Julie as his last ditch effort to, I guess, rediscover, whatever passion he had for detective work, whatever, sides of himself that used to be good at what he does, that side of himself that's functioning, right? Like, he's not drinking, he's drinking the coffee, he's throwing himself completely into that, because when that is gone, or when he stops and sort of sets that aside at all, he's got to focus on how little he has left.
He's got scarce resources too.
Scarce mental resources and all that. Yeah. So that's kind of like you see, like all these groups of people, like what they do when they are kind of out of options. They don't have other choices to make.
That was one I missed.
Okay. Well, what do you got, Glenn?
Well, start off, I don't know if I'd call it a specific word for theme, but the Anderson Station stuff displays conflict between the haves and the have-nots. And it's, the underprivileged and exploited adulterers are actually resisting the suits at this point, but they fall into a violent resistance, like happens so often in real life. The whole thing just, it screams reality to me. It's like, I'm pretty sure this has happened in a very similar way. Like, maybe not a space station, but
basically the same
My Lai. I mean, My Lai in Vietnam was not the same kind of situation, but the good guys wiped out an entire village. I mean, literally wiped out a village. And for the most part, got away with it. And that's exactly the same kind of thing you see here with what happened at Anderson Station. So that whole class struggle, I guess, and I'm a leftist, so class struggle is something I pay attention to. But also there's the concept, the dual concept of respect and disrespect that I found here a couple of times. Alex Kamal says to Holden, a lot of good Martians died saving our lives to get the truth out. It kind of implies two things. One, he's trying to say honor and respect what they did for you. And two, respect them even more, show more respect to them by making sure we get that truth out. Because that was the argument Alex was taking, the stance that he wanted to go and he wants that truth revealed. Stark Helo cops who distrusted and disliked Havelock for a long time, all now are showing respect for him in a way by being fired up to get the guy who almost killed him. They're actually finally looking at him as one of their own, not a belter, but a fellow law enforcement officer.
It took him being impaled
to
maybe get some of that. I wondered about that. Like, is it really about Havelock? Do they have some other reason? I don't know. It was kind of interesting. Not fully explored, so who knows?
It's a rite of initiation.
It doesn't matter. There's the thing. I mean, the thin blue line. You don't cross that, but there's a unity among
them.
Yeah, and they feel there's a very strong us versus them for law enforcement officers.
I guess,
so even a fellow cop that you hate, somebody hurts him, he hurt one of your own. It doesn't matter which one of your own, you
Yeah.
go after him.
Yeah. How you divide
Well, you
up
know,
how you see the people. Yeah.
as a theme, you could say either the thin blue line or brotherhood.
Yeah. Also, Anderson Dawes was treating Miller with nothing but respect.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah.
Which is completely different than in the book.
Yeah. And interesting because I'm not sure anybody else is really treating Miller with respect. And it's actually kind of interesting that Miller doesn't respond to
Mostly
that a
sort
little
of.
more.
Until he's a dick to her, on any
Yeah.
given encounter.
She tries. She does
She tries.
try. And I think a little bit of her maybe feelings come through of like, she probably knows that he's like a screw up.
The TV
Um,
wiki lists her as a former partner, but I
Yeah.
don't know exactly what they mean by partner, because I got the impression watching season 1 that they used to be an item at one point. That was
Yeah,
my feeling.
maybe
But now I'm finding
was
out
the
that they're
idea.
just partners, or were they partners?
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
And somebody had to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that no, that's probably true because, like, I mean, for one thing, if they were just like partners on the force or whatever, I mean, why aren't they now? Like, I
Yeah.
don't know. Yeah.
Because he got
Well,
signed to have.
given Miller's obsessive qualities,
Mm-hmm.
they could have been police partners,
Mm-hmm.
and he might have thought they were more than that.
Yeah.
Oh,
I would
that's
feel that'd be
awkward.
totally within his book character.
I mean, yeah, but then I feel like she would like him a lot less.
The book version of her is so different. 'Cause the TV show
Yeah.
is apparently a combination of Octavia Moss from the book and Candace,
Okay.
his ex-wife.
Yeah.
So apparently they're taking stuff from her and merging that, and that's according to the article, the behind the scenes piece I
Okay.
saw on the wiki.
That makes some sense because honestly, that's what the funny thing was when I first saw this character on screen. I'm like, oh yeah, they made a new character because I completely forgot
She
about
was
that.
his last.
'cause
She
she's
was his
just a
final partner.
completely different person in the
Yeah.
books. Like it's not the same character. They have
She
the same name, but
replaces
it's not.
Havelock. She replaces Havelock when Havelock takes
I
the
remember
lead.
right, and I remember that now. But it just at the time, I was like, oh yeah, it's a different character. Nope.
She's the one who tells him he's nothing.
Right. They have that big conversation where he figures out like, oh,
Nobody
I'm a
respects me.
screw up.
So that kind of ties right into the respect disrespect. I had another one, and it's kind of tangentially maybe related, a little bit of overlap probably, but trust and distrust pops
Mhm.
up.
It's kind of always a theme here, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, I guess, but
I feel
Holden
like we
points
talk
out.
about that all the time.
Yeah, Holden points out that everyone in the solar system are going to look at them like they're terrorists because they survived. You're the only survivors of the Kant and the Donnager.
Yeah.
That's fishy. That is fishy. I mean, we know how it happened, but it doesn't
He's
look
not
good.
wrong. He's not wrong. They don't.
I think
Right.
we totally forgot to mention the very end of the episode where Holden is seeing the footage of him.
I was just thinking
Yeah,
that
his
like we
face on
didn't
the
talk
wall.
about that because that is different. Like where he's like surprised basically to see his face out there like that. Like
And it's the exact opposite of what Glenn was saying. Like they were going to be treated like terrorists. Like, no, they're treated as heroes.
Well, yeah, some
Yeah.
OPA. Well,
Some.
he's treated like, but they're also thought to be dead too. But if they showed back up, I don't know. A lot of OPA would support them, but what does everybody else call the OPA? Terrorists.
yeah.
So terrorists supporting terrorists is kind of like an obvious conclusion.
They are going to Fred Johnson, who is OPA. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still don't know how he ended up OPA. I'd like to know that someday. How he ended up that powerful in the OPA, especially.
Because he's Fred Johnson. I don't know. I just think it is who he is.
Yeah. So basically, Holden's pointing out the entire solar system is going to distrust the Rossi.
Yeah.
The Martians would trust their story about how they ended up with Hitachi. I think Amos mentions that.
Yeah.
Miller, still distrustful of Dawes. That's pretty obvious. And his motivations and his information, because he throws that away. Decides to let that guy who spiked Havelock go free.
Yeah.
And he distrusts Anderson's eyes even when Dawes seems to be showing trust in him,
Yeah.
because he's constantly wooing Miller to his side. He's always trying to. He really wants to recruit, and that's the way it's felt the last couple episodes since he.
It does. Yeah. And you're right that he does. He's the one person who does kind of show Miller some respect and trust, which is very interesting. And what I would say, and I'm playing armchair psychologist here a little bit, but like, I think on some level, Miller subconsciously knows that he is a screw up at this point. And so someone who shows trust in him, he will distrust, because there's that deep down feeling of, nah, I'm a screw up. If you trust me, I don't trust you, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
definitely some of that.
he would prefer to be, I think, fighting against someone who doesn't want to trust him. Like, if he has to prove himself to someone who doesn't trust him, that makes him feel better in a way than you're someone who's like leveling with him and trying to show him some respect. And he's like, oh, you think I'm okay? You're clearly not okay.
Yeah, I get that. Let's see if I had any others. Miller trusts Moss enough to show her what he's been working on that he wasn't supposed to be focusing on.
Mm-hmm. He just can't not talk about it to somebody because he's that obsessed.
And you've got Amos always trusting Naomi, even voting with her to go, not go to Tycho. But then, even though he trusts her because he says she almost always makes the right decision and he's always able to figure it out, except this time he wasn't able to figure it out.
Right, which was, I like that little scene between the two of them. I think that's a good one, right?
He's not dumb.
No,
he gets his mental faculties get underappreciated, I think.
He has figured out a method that works for him because he's not, as much as he thinks he's just like blindly following what someone else would do, he knows somewhat how to pick people. That's a skill right there, right? Like, he's not just picking any rando to follow. He's picking Naomi. Well, that was a smart choice.
Yeah.
But he's also learning from her by observing her and by following her lead, because he's able to say, no, this time something is off. Something isn't right here. And he's able to say that to her. And then once he kind of calls her on that, she's like, yeah, you're right. What else are we going to do? Let's do it.
So, it kind of reminds me of one of my favorite scenes in the book is where Amos says, like, this isn't rocket science, and Holden just breaks out laughing his ass off.
It's like, you're a rocket scientist.
It is. Technically.
He is, yeah. No, I agree that Amos is underestimated in some ways. Yeah.
Anything else on themes, you guys?
I don't think so.
I have a couple of little snippets of info that I made notes of. Like we talked about, Havelock being staked in the show, and that he wasn't staked in the book, that there was somebody who was.
Right.
There's a guy named Enrique dos Santos.
Okay.
And we see from Miller's POV how Miller was investigating that crime in the book. And it was during all that we Miller comes to the conclusion and realization of how inured to dead bodies he is, to death.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just another sign of a mental decline. There was a change they made that I don't dislike, I don't like, I'm curious about. Why did they have it so that Fred had no idea who was on the Tachi?
I don't know either. Yeah, it's a bit weird. That is very different, right? Like, specifically, he was reaching out to Holden in the book. And why, I don't know why he would necessarily, like, I mean, I do know why he'd want to reach out to anybody on the Tachi anyway, but it is a bit weird. I don't get it either.
Yeah, it was just like a little change in dialogue that they made to do that, and I was just like,
okay,
I don't get it.
guess we'll see. Maybe next week it makes sense. I don't really remember.
And between last week's episode and this week's episode, we lost, well, mostly in last week's episode, we lost the explanation that Alex gave for why boarding parties happen, you know, because, like, at least on a military ship, that they're trying to get to, you know, the computer system, computer cores to get steal data. And the
then
whole
it's a
rationale
race.
for scuttling the Donnager, we lost that. We don't, I mean, yeah, they were about to take the bridge, but exactly how bad is it, you know?
Yeah. Right. Why are they
What are their, right.
And it's their part of their protocol, basically, like,
Yeah.
you know.
And Alex gave it to us in like 30 seconds, 20, 30 seconds, you know, reading it. It's like, all right. And then the show just kind of,
Yeah, they should have included that. Yeah.
you know, it don't make sense for more people.
Yeah.
Oh,
I say for reference in the book, he basically said he had to take all 3 areas at the exact same time or red button blow up.
right.
Yeah.
Here's that quote that I had from the Jitsu master. Hold says, or Miller says, I think she's in trouble. What do you care if she is? I don't know the answer to that one. I like that. I don't know the answer to that one. It's just,
Yeah.
but he does. He knows it. He's got it figured out. He's just not prepared to admit it to himself.
Mm-hmm.
That's the next step that he has to deal with, is admitting that he's
in
obsessed, in love.
Absolutely.
That whole love from a distance type thing.
You know, I had a thought I was going to share here, and, you know, feel free to cut it. We've done Wheel Time, The
Yeah.
Witcher, and, you know, 5 episodes of this so far. And The Expanse is always considered like pretty close to the books. The Witcher being supposed to be relatively close, and, you know, narrative for Wheel Time is just not close at all.
Yeah.
And, you know, so far in here, we've had 4 episodes of The Expanse that have had absolutely nothing to do with the books. Like
Well, but they are. They are the books, but they're
I'd say over half
details,
the episode had nothing to do with the books.
It differs a lot, and there's a lot of stuff that's added, and it is interesting when you really get into it how it comes across differently, you know. But on the other hand, it's like you have the same people, the same authors who are you know, working on this and creating the story, and you know, so if anything should tell you that you have to tell the same story differently in a different medium, like here's the example, because it's the same people doing it. They're the same people trying to solve the problem in a different way.
different medium at a different time.
Yeah.
I think if they were to make The Expanse today, I don't think they would add nearly as much interpersonal drama.
Yeah, you know, I don't know. I mean, you need some of that in TV, and I don't think they were wrong to do some of those things. You know, I mean, again, I can nitpick about certain things and
You know,
and so on, but
I would say it depends on like if Amazon had the range to begin with or sci-fi,
Yeah.
because that would really change.
right, it changes their budget and all kinds of things. So yeah.
I'm looking forward to when Sci-Fi gave them the go-ahead to swear. I don't remember what season that happened, but Sci-Fi Channel says it's on late enough on our channel. We're a cable network. We can do it. Go ahead.
All of a sudden, Amos is dropping F-bombs left and right.
Amos, Abasarala.
Oh,
She
yeah,
drops
yeah,
the
yeah.
best F-bombs in the world.
That's true. She really is the best. Yeah.
I mean, I'd love just to get a snippet of her dropping the F-bomb. You know, and if it wasn't for the fact that I censor the F-bomb on our channel, pretty much the only
Play
word
a
I'll censor.
clip of her.
Yeah, play that clip just because it's gorgeous to watch her say.
Mm-hmm. She says it with true feeling. So
You know, I don't have the time the episodes dropped, like what time, but I want to say Sci-Fi may have dropped this around 7.
No, well, 7 your time. I'm thinking more like
7 my
8
time.
your time.
One of those two, and I want to say the cutoff is like 9 when they start unleashing the language.
Let's see, it's 9 in the Eastern time zone, so they can unleash the language. I don't know if they've got a separate broadcast for a separate version with different language.
that'd be crazy.
But all I know is I watched it on Sci-Fi Channel as it aired with them swearing at one point.
And
All right.
sometimes they actually do have like reruns that run later that have the uncensored language,
Yeah.
because that also was a thing.
But she and I can't reach into your screen. My hand disappeared. That guy up there and her, they're the potty mounds. So I think we're pretty much done, you guys.
Yep.
Thank you for joining me on this journey, as always. Thank you, audience, for watching. Please leave us a like, subscribe, and leave us some comments. And share the video while you're at it. You have a great day. Don't forget to be awesome.